What is happening, fishing friends? Welcome to another episode, and today, yes, we are out on the water. This will actually be the second video in our three-part series. The first one was understanding the brakes on your reel. Today, the second one, tuning your reel when you're out here on the water and trying to reduce backlash. And number three, if you do backlash, how do you get those babies out? So today we'll talk about getting your reel tuned in and getting ready to cast. Now, I can't stress enough that this is the way I do it. It's not the right way, it's not the only way, it's my way. Now, once you get out on the water, use the tips that I'm gonna give you as a good foundation, but tweak it to find what works better for you. You might like your brakes a little bit tighter. You might like them a little bit looser. Whatever it is, find what works for you and roll with it. I wish I could start by saying I have the secret Game Genie code that will never allow you to backlash again, but only Bigfoot has those settings, and they don't exist. So we'll start with setting up the reel. Now, I don't care what kind of reel you have. If you have centrifugal brakes, if you have magnetic brakes, turn all of those off. I've got my dial turned completely off here. Open your reel up. If you have the centrifugal brakes inside there, turn them all off. And you want to start with your spool tension. So you can see how this is pretty loose right now. For beginners, now I understand that tightening up the spool tension is going to reduce casting distance. However, we're not worried about that right now. Ask any pro on the tour and they will tell you that accuracy is key over casting distance any day. So you're going to start with your spool tension tight. Tighten it up like so. So when you're setting your spool tension for the first time, and this will be different for every bait, do it for each bait separately. So I've got my bait tied on, and I'm just going to reduce this and just barely jiggle my rod until that just barely starts creeping down. About like that, nice and slow, nice and slow. Now understand, this is going to severely reduce your casting distance, but again, we're going for reduced backlashes right now. We'll go over casting distance in a minute. Now once you've got that bait so it just barely creeps down like that, just a nice gradual tiny creeping. Now you can tell that you have your spool tension set right to reduce as many backlashes as you can starting out. When you let that bait fall, it hits the ground, you'll notice there's no overrun on your spool at all. That's what you want to start out with. Now I'll also take my brakes on my reel. Whether you have magnetic brakes, I'll turn those to halfway. So these I'm going to turn to 5. If you have the externally controlled centrifugal brakes, turn those halfway. If you have the centrifugal brakes where you have to open it up, pop that open and turn half of them on, half of them off. And you want to go across. So if there's one on the left side, one on the right side, usually they're even and odd numbered. Make sure they're brakes across from each other so you're getting nice even friction on that spool when that's spinning around. You don't want to have 3 on one side turned on and not the other. It could cause brake misalignment. I don't know how true that is, but I always turn opposite sides on. So 2 on, 2 off. Or if you have 6, turn 4 on, leave 2 off. Err a little bit on the side of caution. So again, remember, this is the settings for a beginner angler to reduce as much and as many backlashes as you can. Now once you've got that all ready to go, it's time to start casting. And I always recommend starting with a sidearm cast. And I'll tell you why in a second. When you start out with that cast, you always want to start light. Don't bomb your first cast when you're testing your Baitcaster. Start light. I'm just going to start with a nice light side cast. Okay, everything was great there. I just tapped my thumb on the spool at the end of it. No backlash at all. So I would know for a day like today, I'm ready to go. And I can slowly start increasing that. So that was just a light cast. I'm going to give it a little bit more power, see what it does. Okay, you can see there, no backlash the whole way through. So not at the beginning, middle, or end, it was a good cast. Now speaking of casting, I always start anglers out with that either roll or sidearm cast because it keeps that bait low and parallel to the water. I cringe when I see new anglers go out and start with this, the old dreaded double hand, overhanded axe chop, the very forceful overhand cast. Why does that make me cringe? Well, the number one thing I see new anglers doing wrong with the overhand cast is sending a Hail Mary. That release point is too far back, and when they send it, it's a Hail Mary cast, and that bait is going to hang up in the air. It's going to stall, and the second that bait stalls, your spool doesn't know that, and it keeps going. Number one reason for the big overhand cast overrun is the Hail Mary. Number two is they try to power it. They don't just try to do a regular overhand cast like this. Elbows in, tight, here. It's a regular overhand cast. No, they go two-handed over the head, axe chop as hard as they can throw it. And your spool just can't keep up with it. The brakes can't keep up when you throw it that hard when you're starting out. There's no reason for that. The bait should be pulling line off your reel. You shouldn't be trying to send this bait over to the next country. The third reason I urge anglers to stay away from the overhand cast when they're first starting is because they'll whip it. They'll start here, they'll throw it, and they'll have a sudden stop. They'll throw it, and instead of following through, you know, with that nice bend like this, here, they'll stop. And what happens is when they throw that, the bait's going clear out. They take that rod and stop and pop it back. It stops that bait momentarily. And that slight stop in the bait momentarily is going to cause you to backlash here. Anytime that bait is stopping, when that spool's running and you don't have anything to stop it, that's going to be a backlash. So those are the 3 main reasons I urge new anglers to stay away from that and start with that sidearm roll cast. So let's start casting and troubleshooting. Now the 3 main types of troubles you're going to have with your reel are backlashing right away, somewhere in the middle and right at the end. So let's take my reel for example. Again, nothing's changed. My brakes are set on 5. My spool tension is set so the bait just barely falls, just creeps down, right? I shouldn't have too many issues, but let's say you didn't listen to that. Let's say you back your spool tension off, and now instead of a nice slow fall, it drops real quick. Let's see what happens with that cast before, no issues. Let's see what it does now. That would be problem number 3, overrun at the end. It's caused by too loose of a spool tension or not using the thumbs you have. You should always have that thumb ready, and you should just tap your spool right before it hits the water to stop it. You're not gonna have to worry about those late backlashes. If you're somebody that likes to overhand cast and throw it, I see so many new anglers not using the thumb. They cast, big overhand cast, and the first thing that happens, they gave me the thumbs up. Quit giving me the thumbs up. To alleviate those backlashes at the end of your cast, tighten your spool tension up or have that thumb ready. You're probably just putting it on there just a little bit too late. The bait's hitting the water, you're backlashing a little bit, and then you stop it. Put your thumb on the spool right before it hits the water and you will be a happy caster. Okay, so let's try something else. I'm gonna take my spool tension and, yeah, we put that back to where it was before, but my brakes. Let's take these brakes and turn them off. I'm not gonna use magnetic brakes. Let's see what this does. Oh dear, you can see that was an issue. From the beginning it started out okay, but not too soon after that started going out, we ended up with that. Now how do you fix this? You'll have to wait for the 3rd video to see that. So how do you resolve that issue? As the cast goes on, that backlash just keeps getting worse. It just starts unraveling more. Well, there's nothing slowing down that spool. In that case, magnetic brakes are awesome. Remember, magnetic brakes work the whole way through the whole cast. The strongest at the beginning, but they keep working the whole way through. So that's why if I take this, my settings are unchanged, and I just put that right back up to 5 again, those magnets are going to be working that whole time the spool is going. And if you look at it now, no issues whatsoever. Let's look at the 3rd common error now. This is great if you have centrifugal brakes, because remember, if you're somebody that casts hard and you get a lot of backlashes right at the beginning, those centrifugal brakes pop out right at the beginning of that cast and really help put a brake on. So for instance, take a look at this. My spool tension, as you can see, is quite slow. But when you open the reel up, you can see that my internal centrifugal brakes are turned all the way on to 0. Now, a lot of reels will only have one of these, the centrifugal brake. And if you don't have those on, this is what you're going to see at the beginning of your cast. So you can see at the very beginning there, it was rough. It was just way too much starting out. My magnetic brakes just couldn't catch up to it. There was too much power at the beginning. So I compensated and used my thumb to calm it down. Notice it wasn't one of those where it just keeps getting worse as you cast, you can't control it. This one, I just put a little bit of pressure on with my thumb and it fixed that cast right up. So if you have a reel that has centrifugal brakes, turn those babies up. If you just backlash all the time at the beginning, you can usually solve it with your thumb, but you just can't figure out, why is it just going crazy right when I cast? Make sure you've got your centrifugal brakes on, or if you've only got a couple of them on, turn more of those on inside your reel, or if you have the external dial, crank it up a little bit more. So as you can see, if I keep those same settings, my outside brakes are on max, but this time I actually take those centrifugal brakes and turn them on. Let's just turn 3 of those on, like so. That would be halfway on those centrifugal brakes. And now let's see if I do a pretty decently hard sidearm cast, what's it gonna do? You can see that time it solved that initial burst. Centrifugal brakes are absolutely awesome for people that like to cast hard or, really bomb those casts out there. It really stops that initial burst, that initial backlash right at the beginning from even happening. And that will in turn solve the rest of the cast, because if you can stop that initial backlash, you don't have to worry about it catching up at the end. Now, above all of these, I can't stress enough the use of that thumb. You can see there when I had that bad backlash, if I would have just taken it, casted it, given you the thumb up and left it there, I wouldn't have been able to control that one where I didn't have the centrifugal brakes on. Your thumb can do a lot for you. Now remember how we talked about casting distance? The way I actually set mine when I'm out fishing like any ordinary day, I don't go by the fall rate of the lure. I take my spool tension and back it off, unloosen it until there's just a little bit of side-to-side play. I can just barely hear it click. Can you hear that? It's just barely clicking. That's where I like to set it. Now what would that look like when the bait drops? Well, it's pretty darn fat. If you don't have thumb control, this will blow up your reel right away, and people do that. They'll set their spool so it's about like that and say, okay, I'm good to go. Backlash. So if you're somebody that wants to get more distance, you're gonna have to get used to casting like that and backing that spool tension off just a little bit. The spool tension is really what hinders distance the most. People will crank that real tight and say, I don't have any issues, but I can only cast 5 feet in front of me. Well, the more you loosen that off and the more you train your thumb, the farther you'll be able to cast. Now, as far as brake settings when I'm going, I've been using the new Royale Legend Elite, and I've just been putting this on 5. When I go out and cast, I have a new lure. I don't switch my spool tension at all. All of my finite adjustments happen with the magnetic brakes. So for example, with this lure, if I have my spool tension set just like this, so there's just a little bit of side-to-side play and I cast, There are no issues with that cast at all, but remember, this is a little 3/8 ounce swim jig. If I were to move to something lighter, like a little shaky head or a weightless stick bait, I would have to turn those brakes up. Remember, as I cast, that lure is gonna stall quicker. My spool's not gonna change. I didn't touch the spool tension, so that's still gonna be getting going at a good rate. But when that bait starts to stall out there, that's when I get in trouble with the backlash. So I like to use my brakes as the finite adjustment. If I switch lures, I might just have to give this a couple clicks up more, and it will resolve that issue, as long as I'm using thumb control. If at anywhere in the cast this starts to get squirrely, remember, feather the spool. And all that means is you're just barely touching the spool, just enough to slow it down. Remember, if you mash that spool while it's all crazy and all backlashed, you're just gonna stop it with a backlash. Now, I know some questions people have asked is, well, if you only have the centrifugal brakes, does that mean it's only going to help you at the beginning? What about the middle and end? Well, because those centrifugal brakes put such a stop on that lure right at the beginning burst, it slows that down and allows that lure to pull line out at a good even rate. So it stops at the beginning before it even happens. You've got a good consistent cast. Then people ask, well, what if you only have the magnetic brakes? Is it always going to blow up on me at the beginning? No, it's not. You might have to set your spool tension just a little bit tighter than you normally would, but as soon as you get used to it and start using that thumb and giving it just a little bit of tap at the beginning, you're not going to have to worry about any of that. There's some people that don't even use brakes and they go hard, soft, hard. Meaning when they cast hard at the beginning, they're using their thumb as the centrifugal brake. They're putting just a little tension on it, just so that bait doesn't get too squirrely. It starts going out, they can let up on it as it's gaining distance. As it's about ready to hit again, they go hard and stop it. So hard, soft, hard. If you like to keep your brakes set really, really loose, it's going to require a lot of thumb control, a lot of training, but you can do it. All right, fishing friends, I hope that helped you all understand your brakes and how you can dial them in when you get out on the water. Now, if you have any questions, do not worry. Leave a comment below. I would be happy to help every single person that I can to the best of my ability. Remember, I'm not a pro. I don't know everything. I've fished a long time and I've had a ton of backlashes. So I've had quite a bit of experience at dialing these babies in. Now also comment below if you have any tips for tuning your baitcaster. If you've done something just a little bit different than me, please, if you think it's gonna help another angler out, feel free to leave that in the comments below. I love seeing anglers help other anglers. Be on the lookout for the third video in this series. We'll talk about how do you actually get those nasty backlashes out. Well, I've had a few of those, so I think I can give you a tip or two. Until next time,